Welcome to episode 5 of RocketPod, the podcast for business and charity professionals looking to expand their CRM knowledge to achieve success. You're listening to me, Natalie Silver, and Rocket CRM directors Ian Wicks and Kyle McKee as we discuss user adoption. From our experience, we know how vital it is to get your people using your system properly, as a CRM is only as good as the data you put into it. It's also worth noting that even if you're not introducing a new CRM, you can still apply some of this advice to get your teams using your existing system far better. If you appreciate what we have to say, click that like button and subscribe. So, hey guys, how are you doing? Hi Ian, Kyle, how's your week's been?
Yeah, good, thank you.
Really good, really busy as always. Thank you.
Fantastic,
It's like
as
every
always.
week it's like Groundhog Day, isn't it? Busy. How's your week? Busy.
Good place to be. So today we've come together to talk about user adoption. Now, if we cast our minds back to the last time we huddled together for a podcast chat, it was all about CRM implementation, and there was a ton of advice that we chucked out there. And there was like a 10-step plan for businesses to have a successful CRM implementation. One of the steps in there was user adoption. We kind of skimmed over it. And I remember during the conversation, one of you piped up and said, there's a whole lot more we could say about this topic. So that's what we're going to do today. What I think would be useful for the audience is to kind of ask the question, what is the importance of user adoption in CRM implementation? What role does it play? And what can businesses do to ensure they're doing it right?
Yeah, there's this common misconception, isn't there, that once you've gone live with your CRM project, you've done enough. We've gone live, hooray! The truth is, once you've taken a project live, there's a lot more work that still needs to be done. It's almost like just the beginning of it.
Yeah, there's often you hear about the bad stories about CRM implementations, and generally you'll read a lot of articles and things, or like I do, you tend to find that people quote 60, 70 or 80%, depending on which articles you read, as to the reasons why a CRM project will fail. So the main reason is because of user adoption.
From what I know about user adoption in the whole CRM implementation process is that it can be an issue from the early stages, right from the get-go. So, but what do we mean by the early stages of the CRM implementation and user adoption?
Right, okay, yeah. If you think about a CRM project, so a company or organization is going to put in a CRM system, the most critical stage, and again, this is why we're doing this whole episode, because it gets forgotten about all the time. The most critical stage of that CRM project is to get it from that go live date to a stage where it's like totally accepted as part of everyday life in the organization. It's fully operational. All the staff depend on it. They use it on a daily basis. And this part really gets neglected, and this is where user adoption really comes into play.
Yeah, one of the key things is that on a typical project, there are clearly defined roles and responsibilities, but they tend to go right up to the go live. Who's responsible after go live for ensuring the system is fit for purpose?
Yeah, so often that gets dropped off a cliff, doesn't it? It's like in the hope that everyone can learn to fly before it hits the bottom. I always think about that Roadrunner cartoon, where the Wile E. Coyote is running off the edge of the cliff, chasing the Roadrunner, and then he keeps running until he looks at the camera, and then he realizes he's not running. It's kind of that. There's nothing supporting him.
Yeah, and in reality, in real life, that's going to create a whole load of mess, isn't it, really? Pretty grim. So, once the project's live, users are engaging with the system. I think the key thing is acceptance, isn't it? And I feel like that's quite a complex matter in itself, because it isn't just about teaching people and processes, kind of a bit more detailed, and it involves winning people over and leadership. So this is kind of almost like a training and leadership topic as well as much as it is making sure the processes are in place.
Yeah, bearing in mind that you're asking people, to do their work, what they used to doing. We're asking them to do it in a new system, and sometimes in a new way as well. It may not just be a new system. It may be a new process completely.
Yeah, or sometimes it's new process and system. It's both. And you've got users at differing levels of competence with systems as well that you have to deal with.
Yeah, it's good to recognize that during that ramping up period, and it is a ramping up period for users and stakeholders, there are kind of stages of crawling, walking and running for the CRM stakeholders, and to be able to provide support for them at an appropriate level for where they're at, as well as they progress through those stages of proficiency, is key to getting that system operational and fully functional.
Yeah, and I guess that takes time. And as I said before, a lot of that comes down to kind of the approach and the leadership. Before we kind of delve into what your tips would be for good user adoption, what do you think are good examples of poor user adoption? What would that look like?
I think one of the easiest ways to identify that is almost if you walk into an organization and say, can I speak to their CRM administrator? You generally get someone looking back and go, what CRM administrator? Or you need to talk to IT. Or in the worst case scenario, it's somebody that's left the organization or doesn't even know they have CRM.
Yeah, it's a bit one of those hot potato scenarios where like, oh, yeah, not me, speak to Jeff. Jeff's like, no, speak to Brenda. And then you go around the houses and no one really knows who's responsible for what. Nightmare.
It's funny. I mean, let's list a few things around a poorly adopted system and then chat a little bit around each one.
All right, well, I'll kick things off. So I think what I've just touched on is kind of something that keeps jumping out is the lack of clear ownership and executive sponsorship, whether that's down to, well, it is often down to weak leadership or that it's assumed or is actually just completely owned by the IT department and it isn't like more of a holistic company-wide approach. I think that's when companies can get into trouble, I would say.
True. Yeah, sometimes you see that where the person who's given the responsibility for the CRM is not in a position of high enough authority within the organization. So literally they've got no remit to say to people, go and use it. Do you know what I mean? So you're absolutely right. Clear ownership and executive sponsorship is key, having somebody on the board.
To add to that, the danger of then having it just owned by one area, say IT department, is that they become quite blinkered with it and they can sometimes not see the needs and the requirements of other areas of the business. And as we know, CRM isn't now just about supporting sales. It delves into other areas of the business. Like going back to that keyword, holistic and kind of company-wide, that's critical, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it can be owned by IT, but the business or the key business users need to have an input, a significant input into the system and the management of the system. Another example, another symptom of it would be sort of reporting via Excel. Generally, what you find is reporting or entries into an Excel spreadsheet of some sort that is then used for meetings, whether that's board meetings or team meetings or whatever it is. The problem with that is you're not then getting your metrics from your centralized CRM system. So people, if they have a choice of whether they put it into a CRM system or they put it into the Excel spreadsheet that's used for reporting, they'll put it in the Excel spreadsheet because it's the path of least resistance. They don't necessarily want to put it in twice.
I wonder how many people listening are relating to all these things as well. I mean, another example, right? Your system is just not trusted. People don't trust the CRM. They know the data's out of date. There's old phone numbers in there that haven't been updated.
Oh God, yeah.
There's leads that have been there since 1989, for example.
Absolutely guarantee. There's loads of people nodding their heads or thinking, yep.
Duplicates left, right, and centre. Badly formatted records, inconsistent stuff. That's very typical of a system that is poorly adopted.
And data silos as well. This ties across probably all the points really, but having data in multiple places. So due to systems not being trusted, people might use their Outlook contacts list to store the latest contact information for certain key clients, whereas that should be somewhere centralized.
Yeah, I was literally talking to a charity, well, actually a community interest company yesterday, and we were talking about CRM, and thankfully they're on the ball. So they're already looking at what they're going to need in terms of CRM, say 12 months down the line, because they already know. They're not technical, I wouldn't say at all. In fact, if they're listening to this, they'll know who they are and they hold their hands up, so they're not technical, but they are like savvy in terms of like looking at the future and not wanting to get themselves into a whole lot of mess with their data. So if they can stop that from happening and that data silos happening too much too early, it'll make lives a lot easier when they actually begin to scale up and get a new system.
Perfect. Excellent.
And another example would be complexity of the actual system itself. And training plays a role in this, but if it's too complex, even if you look at superficial things, even if it's not pretty, it's ugly, or it's not intuitive, or it doesn't feel natural for the users, or the processes within the business have changed from when the system was actually implemented. It leads to people just sort of providing excuses for users not to use these systems.
Yeah, exactly. And if you're absolutely right. And if the users can get their job done without having to do it in CRM, as we've talked about it, they've put it in Excel sheets, As long as they're getting their job done, their line manager's happy that they're getting their results. CRM ends up being seen as an optional thing, allowing people to use those spreadsheets, not holding people to account, updating records in CRM and stuff like that.
And that's also where part of the weak leadership comes into play there, because if you've got the leadership team asking for the metrics from the centralized system, it forces the users to enter the data into that system rather than seeing it as a chore. That is the sort of the single source of truth within the organization.
Okay, so let's move on then so that we've looked at what a poorly adopted system looks like. Let's do our top 10 tips, user adoption. Just go round robin. We'll just do one, go around and add them in ourselves. Do you want to give us the first one, Natalie?
Yeah, of course. Okay, so the first one is people. So obviously we're talking about technology and processes a lot, but actually this is all about involving the users from the get-go, right from the beginning, because they're key, because your system is built for them and it's supposed to help them so that you can help your customers. So it's all about people. And I think one of the major challenges is the resistance to change, especially in maybe more traditional sectors or cultures where they've always done things a certain way. They can be probably the hardest nuts to crack, I would say, to be honest, in that area.
So in terms of getting them on board, you're quite right. Just highlight them as early adopters, counter that potential resistance like from the get-go. Get them on board. What do they need?
Yeah, exactly. Like identifying their pain points and then reassuring them as early as possible that this new change is going to be a positive impact and it's not going to be cumbersome. It's not going to be adding to the workload. If anything, it's going to do the absolute opposite. So it's almost like an internal PR strategy that you need to win people over from the beginning.
And then using those same people when you're doing your user acceptance testing all the way through to the end as well. That way, they're going to end up being an ambassador. They're going to be champions for your CRM system.
Yeah, okay. and listening to them, because I think even if you collate their information, but you don't acknowledge the value of that, even if you can't do everything that you wanted to do, it's about that communication backwards and forwards to them, that we do appreciate what you've fed in. This is where we're going to be taking this system, and this is what's going to be the end product potentially. So it's about communication, a lot of it as well.
Wonderful.
Don't underestimate the amount of time that they need to be involved in that process either, because often what we tend to find is people are expected to do 100% of their normal day-to-day jobs.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
This is a side sort of activity, whereas it needs a significant amount of time to be involved in that process to do it properly.
Yeah. So that's our first one. Cool, blimey, that was a long one. Involving the users, identify early adopters, get the key people involved from the start and all the way through. Okay. Do you want to come up with number 2, Carl?
Yeah, I mean, it's similar to number 1. It's sort of choosing a CRM admin person or multiple CRM administrators. Basically, it's a super user or ambassador who's potentially someone who can serve as a connection between the system itself and the team members. So having a good understanding of what the users need to do or what they are doing and what the system does is very key. They need to understand what the sales teams are doing, the marketing teams, and any other business processes within the organization. They don't need to know which buttons are pressed or which documents are filled in necessarily, but understanding what those things are is key for them. And also, depending on the size of the organization, it doesn't need to be full-time. So often there's a misconception where that person needs to be full-time. It doesn't, depending on the size of the organization. Ideally, if they're logical, if they're used to IT systems, if they're used to doing things like data import, stuff like that, great. Or understanding a structure of a database is really useful. Yeah, that
makes a big difference if you can find somebody like that.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll go to the next one. Simple one, training, focusing on training. Make sure that you've got training throughout the whole project. So from the beginning, when you're doing your requirements gathering, just if it's a new CRM system, just expose people to it. Let them understand the basics of how it works right from the beginning, so that when you go live, it's not all of a sudden a great big unveiling of something new, because they've been involved with it all the way through. So it's kind of like that transfer of knowledge all the way through. But you don't need to give everybody the same training session. You can do role-specific training as well. So everybody might have the basic training, but if you've got a specific job to do, you might need some specific training for that as well. Training is a thing that gets dropped the most quickly because of budgets. And nowadays, it doesn't need to be necessarily that way, because with using Teams, you can record the training sessions as well. And it's definitely a worthwhile exercise, recording training sessions, or even if your budget extends to it, just doing some short little training burst videos that last about a minute or 2 minutes just to show certain processes. There's a whole load of things you can do around training to make that part of the whole CRM user adoption. You can do regular follow-up training. You can maybe add CRM usage to a job description. Your expectation of people when you bring them on board is that they know how to use a CRM system of whatever type it is. Another place that we did a project, it was another charity actually, quite a large one. They decided they were going to make the users responsible for upkeeping their own CRM training records. And each person would have a whole load of sessions available, and each user would book whatever session was useful to them. They were responsible for getting up to a certain level themselves. They could book as and when they wanted to, lunchtimes or whatever. And then they had to assess themselves. I can do this unaided. I can do it with a little bit of help, or I need further help. You could assess yourself as you go along. So that was, not everybody's going to have time or the inclination to want to do that, but that was a useful thing. But there's so much you can do around training as well. So yeah, that's my point there. Number 3, focusing on training.
Just something else to add to that. You might want to even think of using things like your marketing tools to share some of those videos. So sending emails out to the user group with links to the various videos. If you're creating things like that, don't underestimate the need, the use of using a marketing tool to do that.
Absolutely. I think it comes down to that strong communication as well. Depends on the size of the company, doesn't it? Because in the past life, I worked for a larger company, and marketing and the HR team collaborated really well in one of the CRM, like a CRM implementation that was happening at that time. And it was like we were able to take all the best bits from the training team, marry it with the stuff that was coming from the marketing tools, but the marketing team were also massively involved in the CRM implementation itself. So we were heavily involved in the user testing because we were using this new marketing software for the very first time, and it was very, very new to the industry as well, to be quite honest. So we were like early adopters in that sense, but that definitely worked. I know there's constraints when there's smaller companies and you might not necessarily have a dedicated in-house HR training team, but definitely having that focus on training is a game changer, definitely. So let's have a look at the 4th tip. We suggest that it's thorough UAT, and UAT stands for user acceptance testing. So what's this? It's basically where you get all of your users to test the system as thoroughly as possible to make sure that all of the requirements that went in earlier have been implemented and they're working correctly and it's built in the correct way. This is critical to ensure that the system is fit for purpose, obviously, because the last thing you want to do is get to go live. Then your team start using it, and then someone from one of the departments goes, you do realise that this is missing from X, Y, and Z. That would be horrendous because that's time wasted, isn't it? So we would always say that you must allow sufficient time, because this does take time, because you're going to get a group of people together, get them in a room, get them onto the system, and basically getting them to test it and break it, essentially.
Yeah, and then you've also got to allow time to collate all the feedback.
Yeah.
Feed that back to whoever's designing the system or the partner, and then they've got to have time to make any fixes or changes as well that are required. So yeah, you're quite right. It needs to be done before go live, but it also needs to have an allowance of sufficient time that the feedback and changes don't affect the go live.
Absolutely. But I think also with some of that feedback, although some of it you might want to fix there, and it's absolutely critical that you fix there and then, some of the feedback might be, we hadn't actually thought of that, but maybe that'll go into a later phase. Once we've got this basic stuff implemented and everyone's happy with it and familiar, that becomes of a later stage. So again, it's just engaging and making sure that your end users are becoming familiar and they're getting that buy-in again, because then they're actually experiencing it for themselves. It's no longer just a plan and a document or something that someone said to them, or meeting notes or an email about this new system. It's real, it's in front of them, and they're actually engaging and using it for themselves. Yeah,
cool. So we've got involving users from the start was our first one. Choosing a CRM admin person or a super user as our second one. Focusing on training is number 3. Doing a thorough UAT, user acceptance testing, before go live was number 4. Thanks, Natalie. Could you give us a number 5, Carl?
Yeah, I would say keeping the system simple.
Yay.
So,
that's our favourite one, right?
That's our favourite, yeah. I mean, you could do that a number of different ways. I think the key thing is to try and identify what the users use all the time. So, for example, these days, a lot of people live in Outlook all the time. So, therefore, you want to surface some of the CRM information in Outlook and get them to be able to copy some of the key information from Outlook into your CRM easily without copying and pasting and doing that sort of thing. So it's very important to try and identify that and identify the flow and make it comfortable for the users. Don't implement something that's completely foreign to what they've been doing. And obviously the training plays a role and they sort of get there on day one and don't actually know what's going on. You know, it's all complicated. So keeping it simple is very important.
Yeah, and you can use tools, can't you, within the system to kind of create a flow, you know, like a process bar or something that will guide a user through a process rather than just having like all these disparate little tables here, there and everywhere popping up and not really knowing what's going on. You're quite right. And another thing we do around that about keeping stuff simple is that we'll often advise a customer that we should start with an MVP, a minimal viable product. You know, what's the minimum you need in order to be able to get up and running very quickly, but also with some benefits. And then from there, you know, we can then start to add in all those nice to haves and all these extra things. But by doing that, what you're doing is you're controlling all those new features and all that complication through governance. You're giving them a very simple product right at the beginning. Everybody can use it. It's very simple. The ramp up time's very quick because there's not that much to learn. Once everybody's confident, then you can start introducing other stuff. So can I go next? You done with that one, Carl?
Yeah.
I think we touched on it a little bit earlier, like KPI reporting or all your reporting. So if you're in the board and you're doing a board presentation, your reporting needs to come from CRM. I mean, maybe it's in Excel, but the data's got to have come from CRM. Don't be taking data from various other places, silos of data. Practice what you preach. If you're a board member or somebody who's higher up in the organization and you're presenting data or you're doing staff reviews, performance reviews for the staff members, use the data in CRM to say, look, this is how many contacts you've created or updated. This is how many leads you've brought in, or this is how many volunteer applications that you've processed, or whatever kind of thing it is. Base those performance reviews on data in CRM. And thereby, of course, you're going to then, next time the person comes, they know they need to keep CRM updated in order to get a good performance review. So yeah, doing your KPI reporting from CRM is my number 6.
Oh, yeah, definitely. So that puts pressure on them to make sure the data goes in, but also it's evidence that what they're doing is actually being utilized higher up. So 2 benefits, isn't it?
Yep.
Absolutely. I mean, touches on that point actually a little bit is integrations, you know. I think you need to follow, this would be my point 7. If you follow a process of a user or a rule of thumb of the user should only enter the data once in one place, then that will help you identify if you need to integrate your system into other things. So, for example, if you're creating an account record in CRM and that needs to be put into finance, you don't want them to, or someone to have to manually rekey all that information into your finance system. You might want to get that to automatically push it across. You might want to get the sales order or the invoice to go across, and then maybe have some financial information back into CRM or SharePoint. Even it could be, you know, using the native integrations that are part of the solution, the solutions like SharePoint, Teams, Outlook. We've mentioned already. It's a very important thing to try and identify what you can use to streamline and make the users' lives a bit easier and a bit simpler. Yeah,
using the everyday tools that they use as well. Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so point 8, good quality data. And this is something that I've personally experienced, witnessed, felt the pain of, is poor quality. So what you don't want to do, and it often happens, doesn't it, where a company will have the shiny new CRM created for them, and then they just shove it full of really terrible, poor quality data. It's like
old data,
decayed data, which is like, it's not going to bring any value to them. So what we're saying here is make sure that the data you put into the new system is accurate, it's up to date, it's relevant, making sure it's actually complete. So sometimes when you're doing this stage of the CRM implementation, the data integrity, it's a good checkpoint to get your staff more bought into the importance of good quality data. And it can be, part of the exercise can be to get them to clean up that data so that you haven't got, say, duplicates, that you are completing all the records properly. And even it can be like an opportunity for you to send out, and I know because in the past life I've done this, is sending out a blanket email, courtesy email to people who've opted in to just say, is all of the safe information still accurate, and enabling them to be able to update it themselves. So yeah, we can't stress this enough. It's really, really, really important that it's good quality data in your new system. And
absolutely.
I think also, it encourages accountability. Everyone should have accountability in terms of the data. So if there's an account manager with a certain number of records, it's his responsibility to ensure that that's kept up to date. And it might not have been in the past, but it's a good opportunity to start on a strong foot.
Yeah. And it all kind of ties in together, because that ties in with the KPI reporting that we talked about, and the data quality stuff all ties in with point number 2 that Kyle made about having a CRM administrator person, because they could be like the data police in the organization, making sure they can set rules up. If the CRM is sophisticated enough, there'll be rules engines that you can put in the background and they can create those rules. Companies with the same website, for example, or contacts who've got the same email address. There should be pop-ups to say, this looks like it might be a duplicate. And your CRM admin can create those rules as well. So, yeah, absolutely. My next point, number 9, is to focus on the value that the system provides. So at the end of the day, the system has to provide value, okay? The users shouldn't be or feel that they are servants to the CRM. It should be the other way around. And unfortunately, too often it is the case where people feel like, I'm going to do my job, and then I've got to log time in the CRM. I've got to go and then I'm going to do something, and then I've got to do it in CRM and log that time. Doing it in CRM should be part of that job. Do you know what I mean? It needs to provide value. So whenever a system is being designed, it should serve some value, some benefit to the users as well as to the organization. So some of the examples of that, like that centralized store of information, just having a CRM system, you've got everything central rather than in those data silos that you mentioned earlier. And then when you've done that, you can actually segment the customers, because you've got a whole load of attributes about a customer. What do they purchase, or what do they want to volunteer for, or what are the key things that they're interested in. We can then use that data to segment them and then serve them better with stuff that's even more relevant to them and give them much better communications. By doing that, you can have much more efficient processes. With modern CRMs, you can make processes very, very efficient. And as I said earlier, guided as well. Essentially, a good CRM system is going to allow for better, quicker, and more efficient interactions with the customer. And it's going to end up with happier customers and give you, that utopia that they call the single version of the truth, rather than we've got a record in his spreadsheet over there, and I think there's one over there as well, etc., etc. So yeah, that's my number 9. Just focus on making sure that there's benefits for the organization, for the users, and focus on the value of the CRM system.
Can I just add to that, Ian? I think that needs to happen really early on as well, and it should do at the point of when you're launching this and informing your members of staff about what changes are coming. It's about pointing out what that value is going to be, the benefit to them right from the beginning, so they know that whatever the next 12 months or 6 months or whatever has in store for them and the changes that are coming is all about making their lives easier.
Yeah, absolutely. And not just paying lip service to it, but actually making it so. Yeah, absolutely.
Another tip would be around encouraging or providing or giving the users awards or rewarding them in some way based on their usage. That could be as simple as anyone who makes the most sales today doesn't have to make a cup of tea for the office tomorrow or something. Simple as that. Or you could gamify it in some sort of way. It's a very simple thing, but that it encourages the use and it creates a good culture within the team.
Yeah, absolutely. The old wall of fame or the wall of shame. These people have not kept their system up to date. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So that's 10. That was relevant awards. So that's kind of our point 10. Have you got one more, Natalie?
Yeah, so there is a bonus point 11. So working with a partner and getting regular catch-ups to keep abreast of what's new and what's available with the system. So with good modern CRMs, you'll find that the software is updated on a regular basis, and that's fantastic for your organization and for your employees. But what you need to do is make sure you're making the most of those updates and improvements as they come. So if you've got a CRM partner, then this is when a managed service contract can be really, really beneficial, because the partner will keep you in the loop as to what new features are coming along and the quick wins. And again, you're getting most out of the system continuously. It isn't like you've been given your CRM and then off you pop, away you go. It's a continual improvement. And we would always say keep focusing on small improvements, to always look at improving your processes, always think about continuous improvement. Yeah.
100% right. And that's the way that CRM is adopted and is seen in most organizations now. Things have changed so much over the last few years. And organizations do now see it as that, don't they? They see we're going to put it in and we're going to just have that mindset of making small cyclical changes, small improvements all the time, rather than just set it and forget it, and then it goes out of date. I think we talked about this in a previous podcast edition as well, but yeah, absolutely right. Working with a partner can be very, very beneficial in that way because they know exactly what's coming up, can advise you, you can have a regular catch up with them. So you're working on your CRM internally and you're the data police, you're knowing who's doing what's going on, but then you can work with a partner to start looking at, okay, what else can we bring in? What's going to serve us? What's going to give us some more benefit? Fantastic. Thank you for that, Natalie. I guess that's 11 top tips for CRM user tips adoption. What do you think?
That's a lot, isn't it? It is a lot. So if you haven't listened to the previous episodes on CRM implementation and you've come across this episode, it might be a really good idea to go to them. You can see that there's so much to consider when you're looking at CRM implementation. Just the user adoption itself is a really broad topic. You know, the common theme here is your people and getting the people involved and invested from the get-go, winning them over, listening to them, communicating well, two-way dialogue, showing them that you value them and this system adds value. So people and value is the key thing. And maybe the magic element too is leadership, because you need people at the top who are going to showcase what good looks like, inspire people to change and facilitate that necessary change and have the influence that's required to really push that change forward, especially if it's a more traditional and slightly resistant organisation.
Cool. Mm-hmm. Excellent. Well, I think that's a wrap, guys. I'm ready for a cup of tea. Don't know about you.
Yep, make mine a coffee, please, and maybe a biscuit. This has been the RocketPod podcast, delivered by Rocket CRM, the place for spot-on CRM advice delivered in a simple-to-understand format, as Rocket CRM makes CRM simple. The show was produced by the team at Rocket CRM and Thumbs Up Marketing, with special thanks to Alex Tilbrook, Design and Illustration, and MD Hammond. For information on Rocket CRM, visit rocketcrm.co.uk, and you can also follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn. Twitter's @RocketCRM UK and LinkedIn @Rocket-CRM. Thanks for listening.